and allow folks to be accountable. And so the Officers' Bill of Rights is across the country. How do we start to deplete that and really break away at that? So in addition to being defensive, I think we also have to be careful that this is a moment where lots of folks have ideas about legislation, and so how do we make sure that what we pass doesn't in fact reinforce the status quo or consolidate power? And the two main areas that I see this happening in is number one, body cameras, and number two, community policing, which I'm going to put in quotes the whole time because no one actually knows what that means, and if you do, holler, because I would love to know what it means. So in terms of body cameras, so I think there's three things. Number one is 2/3 of departments that have gotten funding for body cameras have no written regulations whatsoever. And there's been a lot of state bills in California and New York around test programs of body cameras. And so essentially like giving folks money first and like, why don't you film all of this and let us know how it goes? And that's not sufficient, right? Body cameras are an incredible investment. It's an investment that in fact increases police budgets without any accountability, which in fact is what got us into this problem in the first place. And so thinking about body cameras and those types of reforms in a way that doesn't just pay police departments more, and not to even mention the corporate actors who are getting millions of dollars, and Taser United is one of the main ones. Taser United has been, this microphone is giving us some bass. Taser United has been profiting off of tasing and holding people in our communities for now decades. And so to give them even more money to now film our communities is problematic. And so thinking really, I think, intentionally and critically about the ways that reforms that we are passing, that we are packaging as victories, may in fact just consolidate power of the folks who have been injuring and hurting our people in the first place. And I'm not going to even get into the surveillance state that body cameras create, but if you want to talk about that, and I would love to, we should get a drink, because I think that as we move towards this, if we are creating a state in which surveillance is now the new form of policing, that is also a problem. We should ask ourselves what body cameras actually do. Secondly is community policing. And so community policing is actually a phrase and an idea that came about in the 1990s under Bratton in New York City. And it was used then, as it's being used now, to justify the hiring of more police and to justify putting police in more places. And that includes our schools and places where police really, and police themselves. I mean, I think it was interesting during the task force hearings to hear police chiefs talk about that it wasn't their job to be social counselors, that they were not mental health experts, that they did not want to do that job. And community policing in lots of ways justifies the expansion of police duties and the expansion of police budgets. And so thinking about the reforms that we are championing and thinking about whether or not they in fact are moving us in the right direction. And this I think goes back to the necessity to have a long-term vision about the world we want to live in. And to Dante's point, it's a world in which safety is not just defined by cages and surveillance, that safety is about housing, it's about education, it's about jobs. And so how do we think about our criminal justice reform package as really touching each of those areas as well? So in addition to being defensive and being careful about where we tread, I think the last piece, and the piece that for me is most exciting and important, is about transformation. So how do we, as we are thinking about legislation, and I know that it's not easy for y'all, you guys are in lots of houses are controlled by Republicans, lots of agendas are aggressively like anti-black, anti-poor, and so I know that you guys are in the mix, but how do we, even inside of that kind of difficult space, be thinking transformatively? And I have a list for y'all about some of the things that we can do that are transformative, but I think also being in spaces and being in conversations with folks on the ground, because people locally are thinking in incredibly creative ways about the world they want to see. And people who are most impacted by violence and most impacted by state violence have ideas about how to solve and how to get out of this situation that I think are incredibly valuable that folks have to be listening to. But in terms of some ideas that I have about transformation, number one is the end of cash bail. That cash bail has put us into a system of plea bargaining